reported a rude driver who scratched my car at a gas station. The next day, he showed up at my door to apologize with flowers and a check. I slammed the door shut, but a week later, we had coffee. Now he's my husband. I appreciate your clicking on my video. Now that you're here, sit down, get your popcorns, and fasten your seatbelts, as I take you on the wildest ride of how I met my husband, the inciting incident, and the aftermath. The scent of stale gasoline and simmering rage clung to me like cheap cologne. My pristine vintage convertible, a testament to countless weekends spent coaxing life back into its rusted frame, now bore a fresh, ugly gouge along its passenger side. The culprit, a hulking pickup truck with tires wider than my ambitions, was driven by a man whose apologies were as substantial as smoke. He'd reversed with the spatial awareness of a blindfolded elephant, scraping metal against metal, and then offered a shrug that spoke volumes. "Accidents happen," he'd rumbled, his voice like gravel. "Got insurance, right?" He was a mountain of a man, all brawn and dismissiveness, with a shock of untamed dark hair that looked perpetually windswept, and eyes the color of a stormy sea that held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, a dangerous charm perhaps, or just plain arrogance. I, on the other hand, was not built for shrugs. My temper, usually a finely tuned instrument of polite but firm persuasion, flared like a faulty circuit board. I'd snapped a photo of his license plate, his truculent face, and the fresh scar on my automotive pride and joy. "You'll be hearing from my insurance," I'd declared, my voice a whip crack against the roar of the gas station pumps. He'd simply raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something akin to amusement playing on his lips, before peeling out of the station in a cloud of exhaust and indifference. I'd spent the next hour documenting the damage, calling my insurance, and submitting the report with a detailed, venom-laced account of the encounter. Reckless disregard for property, I dictated into the phone, imagining his premiums skyrocketing like a rocket launch gone wrong. I wanted him to feel the sting of inconvenience, the financial bite of his careless actions. I wanted justice, pure and simple, served cold and efficient. My family, a vibrant circus of strong personalities and even stronger opinions, would have had a field day with this story. My father, a retired history professor whose favorite pastime was dissecting historical battles over dinner, would have applauded my strategic retaliation. My mother, a former prosecutor who now channeled her formidable intelligence into tending prize-winning orchids, would have meticulously catalogued every detail, preparing a hypothetical legal brief in her head. My sister, a whirlwind of artistic expression and fiercely independent thought, would have likely spray-painted a protest mural on the side of his truck. But I kept it to myself, savoring the quiet satisfaction of bureaucratic revenge. I expected an insurance claim, perhaps a testy phone call from his agent, a polite but firm negotiation. What I did not expect was a week later the insistent chime of my doorbell. I was mid-sentence, debating the merits of artisanal cheeses with my cat, when the sound cut through the domestic tranquility. Through the peephole, a figure stood, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun, holding a ridiculously oversized bouquet of crimson roses. My stomach did a tight little flip, a premonition that felt less like intuition and more like indigestion. When I opened the door, a crack held by the chain, I saw him. The gas station Goliath, his stormy eyes now holding something that looked remarkably like contrition, or perhaps just a very good impression of it. He was wearing a dark, well-tailored suit that did nothing to diminish his imposing physique, making him look less like a careless driver and more like a very dangerous CEO. In his other hand, he held a crisp white envelope. "Ms. Everhart," he began, his voice still a low rumble, but now laced with a surprising softness that made the air crackle. "I owe you a profound apology." The roses, he offered, their velvety petals a stark contrast to his rugged appearance, were a gesture of regret. The envelope, he explained, contained a check for the full cost of repairs, plus a generous sum for my inconvenience and distress. "No insurance claims necessary," he added, his gaze unwavering, almost challenging. My brain, usually a precision instrument, short-circuited. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how angry insurance claims ended. This was something else entirely. My carefully constructed wall of righteous indignation wavered, threatened by the sheer audacity and unexpected grandeur of his appearance. The logical part of my mind screamed scam. But another, more primal part, registered the genuine concern etched around his eyes, the almost vulnerable tilt of his head. I stood there, frozen, a deer in the headlights of his unexpected charm offensive. My cat, usually aloof, rubbed against my leg, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The roses, impossibly fragrant, seemed to mock my resolve. "I don't need your charity," I finally managed, my voice a flimsy shield. I looked from the pristine check in his hand to the intimidating bulk of him, a man who clearly didn't do things by halves, even apologies. I filed a report. "Let the system handle it." His lips quirked, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement that held a hint of amusement, as if he found my feigned obstinance quaint. "The system is slow, Ms. Everhart, and I prefer to deal with my mistakes directly." He took a step closer, and I instinctively retreated, my back hitting the doorframe. The air grew thick with unspoken tension, a strange mix of annoyance and an undeniable, unsettling pull. My resolve, which had been so unwavering at the gas station, felt suddenly fragile. This man was not just apologizing, he was asserting himself, invading my personal space with the force of his presence and the sheer unexpectedness of his gesture. "I don't accept apologies wrapped in cash," I declared, my voice regaining some of its steel. "And I certainly don't accept unannounced visits from men who scratch my car and then try to buy their way out of it." I gestured wildly at the roses, then at the envelope. His eyes, those stormy depths, held mine. "Then perhaps you'll accept a coffee," he suggested, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a challenge veiled in politeness. A chance for me to explain myself, face to face, without the fumes of a gas station or the urgency of a scratched fender. My breath hitched. Coffee. It was such a mundane, normal suggestion, utterly incongruous with the dramatic display before me. It was a lifeline thrown into a sea of confusion, a small, reasonable request from an otherwise unreasonable situation, and that, more than anything, threw me off balance. I slammed the door, the roses still clutched in his hand, the check still unaccepted. The resounding thud echoed in the sudden silence of my apartment. I leaned against the door, heart pounding like a drum solo, the scent of roses now seeping through the wood, a persistent reminder of the encounter. I was furious with him for showing up, furious with myself for even considering his offer, and utterly bewildered by the strange, unsettling ripple he'd left in my perfectly ordered world. My insurance claim, my meticulous documentation, all of it suddenly seemed trivial, overshadowed by the sheer, unbridled force of his unexpected apology. This wasn't just about a scratched car anymore. This felt like the opening volley in a much larger, much more complicated engagement. I looked at the cat, who stared back with knowing, emerald eyes. "Well," I muttered to her, "that was certainly unexpected." The silence offered no rebuttal. The roses sat on my kitchen counter for a full day, their vibrant crimson a mocking testament to my internal debate. Every time I walked past them, they seemed to whisper, "Coffee." My initial fury had cooled, replaced by a simmering curiosity that felt like a tiny, insistent drill bit working its way into my composure. Who was this man? His apology, while audacious, had also been oddly sincere, a force of nature in its own right. The check, which I still hadn't touched, lay accusingly on the entryway table. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle, and the unsettling realization that principle sometimes had to contend with the sheer, undeniable presence of another human being. A week later, my resolve crumbled like a stale biscuit. The memory of his stormy eyes, the surprising softness in his voice, the ridiculous, romantic gesture of the roses, all conspired against my logical defenses. I found myself at the daily grind, a tiny coffee shop nestled between an antique bookstore and a bespoke hat maker, a place where the scent of roasted beans and old paper always soothed my overactive mind. He was already there, occupying a corner booth like he owned the place, a dark roast steaming in front of him. He wore a simple, dark sweater that somehow accentuated the breadth of his shoulders, and the untamed dark hair still looked perpetually windswept, as if he'd just stepped off a motorcycle. When he saw me, a slow, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a flash of genuine warmth that surprised me. It wasn't the arrogant smirk from the gas station, nor the contrite politeness from my doorstep. This was something else entirely, something that made my stomach flutter like a moth trapped in a jar. "Ms. Everhart," he greeted, his voice a low, melodic rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the opposite seat, clutching my messenger bag like a shield. "Curiosity got the better of me," I admitted, my voice a little sharper than intended. "And the roses were impressive," he chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the booth. "I believe in making a statement, and in rectifying my errors with equal measure." "So what exactly is your error, beyond an apparent disregard for other people's vehicles?" I challenged, hoping to regain some control of the narrative. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense, captivating. "My error," he began, "was twofold. First, a momentary lapse in judgment, a regrettable distraction that led to the unfortunate incident with your beautiful car. Second, and perhaps more importantly, my initial reaction. The dismissiveness. The casual shrug. That was unforgivable. I was having a rather challenging day, and I let it get the better of me. But that's no excuse." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I truly am sorry for how I behaved, and for the damage to your car. I pride myself on being meticulous, on attention to detail. That incident was an anomaly." He spoke with a quiet intensity, his words measured and sincere. There was no grandstanding, no theatrics, just a straightforward admission of fault. It was disarmingly effective. My internal lawyer, who had been drafting counter-arguments, found herself without a brief. "A challenging day?" I prompted, unable to resist the bait. He hesitated, then a faint, almost imperceptible shadow crossed his face. Suffice it to say, I received some rather unsettling news just moments before I pulled into that gas station. News that shook my foundations a bit, but again, no excuse. "You didn't deserve my distraction or my rudeness." Unsettling news that involves what exactly? My journalistic instincts, honed by years of devouring complex narratives, kicked in. I wanted details, depth, a reason that made sense. He regarded me for a long moment, those stormy eyes seeming to weigh his options. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he began to speak. "My name is Silas Thorne," he revealed, the name itself sounding like something out of a Gothic novel. "And the unsettling news was that my family is complicated. Very complicated. My father, a man whose ambition is matched only by his ruthlessness, had just informed me of his impending retirement and, more importantly, his plans for the succession of Thorne Industries." He leaned back, a sardonic twist to his lips. "Thorne Industries isn't just a company. It's an empire built on legacy and sheer, unadulterated power. Logistics, shipping, global trade. Think of it as the circulatory system of the modern world. And my father as its cold, calculating heart." He paused, his gaze fixed on some distant point, as if reliving the moment. His plan involved passing the reins not to me, his eldest son and the one who has actually built significant parts of the company from the ground up, but to my younger brother, Ronan. Ronan, whose greatest accomplishment to date is perfecting the art of the trust fund lifestyle and making questionable investments in artisanal dog biscuit companies. I blinked, trying to reconcile the image of the ruthless corporate titan with the man who'd scraped my car. "So you were having a bad day because your father decided to play corporate favoritism?" I asked, a hint of genuine sympathy creeping into my voice despite myself. "Favoritism doesn't quite cover it," Silas countered, a dark edge entering his tone. Ronan is malleable. My father views him as a puppet, someone he can still control from the shadows. I, on the other hand, have a rather inconvenient habit of having my own ideas, my own vision for the company, a vision that doesn't always align with his traditional methods. He took another slow sip of coffee, his eyes narrowing slightly. My father believes in old-world power dynamics, in absolute control. He views me as a threat to that control, a rebellious prince. So he orchestrated a situation where Ronan would inherit, effectively sidelining me. It was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation, designed to make me feel utterly disempowered. And it worked for a brief, infuriating moment right before I encountered your car. A thrill, cold and sharp, ran through me. This wasn't just a rich guy complaining about his inheritance. This was a story of betrayal, ambition, and a power struggle played out on a grand, almost Shakespearean scale. This was a man caught in the crosshairs of his own family's machinations, a man whose carefully constructed world had just been upended. And I, with my scratched car and my righteous indignation, had somehow stumbled into the periphery of his personal earthquake. "And you reported me," he finished, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, which, in hindsight, was a rather delightful twist of fate. I found myself smiling back, a genuine, unbidden smile. It certainly was a twist. So you came to my door, not just to apologize, but to assert control? To prove you weren't entirely powerless? He nodded, his gaze intense. Partially. To show you I take responsibility. And, perhaps, he leaned in slightly, his voice a low, compelling whisper. To meet the woman who, even in my darkest hour, still had the audacity to demand justice. The air between us crackled, charged with an undeniable current. This was no longer just about a car. It was about two strong wills colliding, about an unexpected connection forged in the crucible of a minor catastrophe and a major revelation. I felt a strange sense of exhilaration, a thrilling anticipation of what might come next. My perfectly ordered world was definitely not so ordered anymore. Our coffee meetings became a regular fixture, a quiet rebellion against the chaos of our respective lives. The daily grind became our clandestine confessional, the clatter of mugs and the murmur of other patrons forming a discreet backdrop to the unfolding narrative of Silas's family saga. Each session was a new chapter, peeling back layers of a dynastic struggle that was far more intricate and cutthroat than anything I could have imagined. His father, Alaric Thorne, was less a benevolent patriarch and more a puppet master, his strings attached to every member of the family with invisible yet unbreakable threads. His wife, Celeste, was a society matriarch, whose iron will was camouflaged by a veneer of exquisite manners and an unwavering devotion to family appearances. Their daughter, Cassandra, was a sharp-witted attorney whose loyalty was an enigma, shifting like desert sands. And Ronan, the golden boy, floated through life, an accidental beneficiary of his father's strategic maneuvering, blissfully unaware of the tempest brewing beneath the surface. Silas painted a picture of a childhood steeped in expectation, where every meal was a negotiation and every achievement was weighed against the family name. He spoke of his relentless pursuit of knowledge, his strategic mind, his uncanny ability to see patterns and predict outcomes in the complex world of global logistics. He had built departments, streamlined operations, secured massive international contracts that had further cemented Thorne Industries' dominance. Yet, for all his undeniable contributions, he remained, in his father's eyes, the rebellious son, too independent, too much his own man. He fears what he can't control. Silas mused one afternoon, stirring his coffee with a quiet intensity. And he can't control me. His words hung in the air, a statement of defiance, and a quiet admission of a lifelong struggle. As Silas narrated his family's intricate dance of power and veiled resentments, I found myself drawn in not just by the drama but by him. His intelligence was a sharp, gleaming thing, his insights cutting through the superficiality of the world like a laser. He was fiercely loyal, deeply principled, and carried a quiet strength that was both compelling and profoundly attractive. I learned about his love for classic literature, his surprisingly dry wit, and the way his stormy eyes would crinkle at the corners when he found something genuinely amusing. We spoke about everything and nothing. Books, music, the absurdity of modern life, the intricacies of my vintage car restoration, the subtle art of making the perfect espresso. Our conversations were a delicate dance of revealing and withholding, each of us testing the waters, slowly, tentatively. He never pressed, never rushed, simply absorbed, his gaze unwavering, his presence a comforting anchor. I found myself looking forward to our meetings with an eagerness that startled me. My perfectly curated life, once a model of predictable efficiency, now felt infused with a new, thrilling uncertainty. The practical, logical part of my brain, the one that usually governed my choices, found itself strangely subdued by the undeniable, intoxicating pull of his company. It was a slow burn, an almost imperceptible shift, like the gentle turning of a massive ship, but I knew, with a certainty that hummed in my bones, that something profound was happening. The initial annoyance, the indignation over my scratched car, had faded into a distant memory, replaced by a deep and unexpected admiration. We walked through art galleries, his insights into composition and history surprising me with their depth. We argued playfully over the merits of various coffee blends, our laughter echoing in the quiet corners of the city. He never explicitly mentioned his family's continued machinations, but I could see the subtle signs of the ongoing battle in the occasional furrow of his brow, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He was playing a long game, a strategic chess match against opponents who knew his every move, his every weakness. I, too, had my own set of family complexities. My father, the aforementioned history professor, was a brilliant but notoriously absent-minded man whose head was often lost in the annals of time. My mother, the former prosecutor, approached family gatherings like a cross-examination, her questions probing and relentlessly logical. And my sister, the free-spirited artist, viewed conventional life with a healthy dose of skepticism, her pronouncements often delivered with the dramatic flair of a Shakespearean monologue. They were a chaotic, loving, endlessly stimulating bunch, and I knew that introducing Silas into their orbit would be an event of seismic proportions. One rainy afternoon, as we sat in our usual booth, the aroma of cinnamon and coffee filling the air, Silas paused, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "My father," he said, his voice quiet, almost reflective, "he's trying to consolidate his power before his official retirement. He's making some questionable decisions regarding the company's future. Decisions that could ultimately destabilize Thorn Industries if left unchecked." He paused, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "He's underestimated me for years. He believes my rebellion is purely emotional. But he's about to learn that my strategies are far more enduring." A flicker of something, cold and determined, entered his eyes. It was a warning, a promise, and a subtle invitation into his world of high stakes. I felt a surge of exhilaration, a fierce desire to understand, to be a part of his fight. He wasn't asking for help, not directly, but he was sharing a vulnerability, a crack in his formidable armor that spoke volumes. The thrill of it was undeniable. This wasn't just a romance, it was an alliance, a quiet understanding forged in the crucible of ambition and a shared sense of justice. He was unraveling, slowly, deliberately, and with an elegance that was utterly captivating. And I, against all my carefully constructed walls, was falling. Not just for the man, but for the intricate, dangerous dance he was performing, a dance I was beginning to realize I wanted to join. The intensity in Silas's eyes that rainy afternoon had been a prelude, a subtle overture to the symphony of chaos that was about to engulf his family. His father's questionable decisions rapidly escalated into a full-blown corporate coup, carefully designed to isolate Silas and cement Ronan's tenuous position at the helm of Thorn Industries. Documents were strategically leaked, boardroom maneuvers executed with chilling precision, and key allies subtly swayed. The Thorn family, usually a picture of polished unity, began to show cracks, visible even from the outside. Silas, however, was not one to be easily outmaneuvered. His enduring strategies were already in motion, a complex web of legal and financial countermeasures that had been years in the making. He had cultivated relationships with key investors, meticulously documented his father's more egregious financial gambits, and quietly built his own network of loyalists within the company. He revealed all of this to me over countless late-night calls and hushed coffee meetings, laying out the intricate details of his counterattack with the precision of a master strategist. I found myself becoming an unexpected confidant, a sounding board for his complex plans, my own analytical mind thrilled by the sheer intellectual challenge of it all. We would dissect market trends, analyze legal precedents, and map out potential outcomes, our discussions stretching long into the night, fueled by strong coffee and an undeniable growing bond. There was a moment as we sat in a hushed library, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books, and Silas sketched out a particularly audacious move on a napkin, that it hit me with the force of a sudden downpour. This man, who had once been merely the rude driver who scratched my car, was now my intellectual sparring partner, my confidant, and irrevocably the man who had woven himself into the very fabric of my life. Our relationship wasn't a sudden Hollywood explosion. It was a slow, deliberate burn, a fire kindled by shared intellect, mutual respect, and an undeniable magnetic attraction. He wasn't just fighting for his legacy, he was fighting for a vision, a future he believed in, and I found myself believing in it too. "You know," I said, a playful challenge in my voice, as he meticulously drew arrows connecting various entities on the napkin, "your father might have underestimated your strategic mind, but he certainly underestimated your ability to charm your way into a woman's good graces, especially after scratching her car." A genuine, unbidden smile spread across his face, lighting up his stormy eyes. "Perhaps," he conceded, "some strategies are more enjoyable to execute than others." The climax of his corporate battle arrived with the brutal efficiency of a well-oiled machine. A meticulously orchestrated shareholder meeting, where Silas unveiled irrefutable evidence of his father's questionable dealings, combined with his own compelling vision for the company's future, swayed the tide. It wasn't a hostile takeover in the traditional sense, it was a reclamation, a strategic move to safeguard the company from the very man who had built it. His father, Alaric, watched from the head of the boardroom table, his face a mask of cold fury, his carefully constructed empire crumbling around him like a sandcastle in a storm. Ronan, bewildered and out of his depth, could only stare, his trust fund-fueled world suddenly tilted on its axis. Cassandra, Silas's sister, observed the proceedings with a quiet intensity, a flicker of something akin to admiration, or perhaps just pragmatism, in her eyes. It was a victory not just of intellect and strategy, but of sheer, unadulterated will. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the corporate landscape shifted, Silas found himself at the helm of Thorn Industries, not as an heir to a crumbling dynasty, but as its visionary leader. But the victory felt hollow, without someone to share it with, someone who understood the intricate dance of power and the quiet sacrifices it demanded. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of corporate restructuring, Silas appeared at my door, not with roses and a check this time, but with a quiet determination in his eyes. "I think," he began, his voice a low rumble, "it's time we stopped having coffee and started building something together. Something more permanent." He didn't get down on one knee. There was no dramatic declaration under a starry sky. Instead, he simply looked at me, his stormy eyes full of a quiet understanding, a profound connection that had been forged in the crucible of a scratched car, a dramatic apology, and a slow-burning alliance. "You make me better," he said, his hand reaching out to gently cup my cheek, "and I think, perhaps, I make you a little more unpredictable." My heart, which had been steadily beating to the rhythm of his strategic mind, now soared like a kite in a strong wind. The journey from initial outrage to unwavering devotion had been unexpected, unconventional, and utterly, thrillingly unique. It was a story that defied all logic, all expectations, a testament to the strange, beautiful way life sometimes throws two utterly mismatched souls together and watches them create something extraordinary. And so, a few months later, against the backdrop of a sprawling botanical garden, under a sky the color of a perfect sapphire, I married Silas Thorne. The ceremony was intimate, attended by our closest family and friends, my own chaotic, loving family exchanging curious but ultimately accepting glances with the somewhat more reserved, though equally intrigued, members of the Thorne clan. My father, true to form, managed to weave a historical analogy into his toast about the unlikely alliances that shape empires. My mother, ever the pragmatist, quietly assessed the new family dynamics with a keen, approving eye. My sister, the artist, declared our love story a masterpiece of modern romance and strategic brilliance. And as Silas and I stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the future, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was just the beginning of our grand, unpredictable adventure. The gas station incident, the rude driver, the slammed door, the coffee meetings, it had all been a perfectly imperfect prologue to a love story that was anything but ordinary.